Welcome, everyone. It's Carol Fishman Cohen, the CEO and co-founder of Ivory Launch. We're thrilled to have all of you here at our session today on free or low-cost upskilling and reskilling resources. And I'm thrilled to have as our guest Amy Trappey, Head of Customer Success at PowerToFly. And PowerToFly, in case some of you don't know, is a diversity recruiting platform connecting women with Fortune 500 companies and fast-growing startups. And Amy manages a team of 30 focusing on innovative HR solutions to diversity recruiting challenges. She's an expert in upskilling and reskilling and how relaunchers and other job seekers can distinguish themselves using coursework during their job search and beyond. And we're going to get specific and talk about tools and strategies and what works and why. But first, Amy, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Carol. I know we were talking about this before we went live, but I am just a real passionate believer in restart programs, return to work programs. I think they play such a key role when it comes to a company actually enacting DEI best practices. And so I'm really excited to speak to your community, the audience here, and to hopefully uncover just some useful tips when it comes to getting back into the workforce. So thank you.
Well, we've had a long time partnership with PowerToFly and love the work that you do and the impact that you have. So it's great and a privilege for us too. Before we get going, I just wanted to put out an apology to attendees because I think we sent out something earlier that was maybe at the wrong time and it got corrected. And glad that you're all here at the correct time. And I know this is being recorded, so people will be able to watch it if they couldn't make it right now. But really important topic we're talking about today, upskilling and reskilling. We all know that that's a key part of the relaunch process, not only to get the skills themselves, but to signal to employers that how serious you are about returning. So I'm really excited about the opportunity to talk to Amy about details on this and how you can figure out the best programs and all sorts of information that will be relevant to people using upskilling in their relaunch. So Amy, I just started to talk a little bit about the benefits of upskilling and reskilling. So before we get into the specifics, can you talk a little bit more about what does taking upskilling or reskilling courses or coursework do for you as a relauncher besides the obvious?
Yeah, so I think I actually will say the first one, it might be quite obvious, but the most important thing I think that can happen from reskilling or upskilling is creating this sense of confidence in a field where you may not have really felt like you were familiar with it before. And I think that's really true of whether you're just moving from one company to another company, or if you're trying to get back into the workforce. If you can speak to some of just the jargon, the keywords, the systems, the tools. If you have any sense of familiarity with the subject, you're going to be able to share that familiarity with more confidence. And so I think reskilling, upskilling through courses, through boot camps, through mentors, whichever way you do it is going to really give you like the most important thing, which is the belief that you deserve to have this job. That comes from within. And that's what I believe is so powerful about taking the time to invest in yourself and invest in your future career. I think the other really beautiful thing about reskilling specifically is, we all have various things that happen in our lives. We may get on career paths because at one point we just needed a job and we found ourselves growing in that way. But what's really powerful about these programs is that they allow you to kind of take that control back. And it's no longer about like, what did you do in the past? It's about what you can do in the future. And I think that's the beauty of these programs being so much more frequent these days, is that a lot of just where you want to spend your time, like when you're on this earth, is more so up to you. And now you have programs to get you those skills, and then further programs that allow you to be launched into a workplace if the company has the right values.
So many excellent points there. And I totally agree. We talk about how you have to become a subject matter expert all over again. And I love the way you're talking about, it's not just the coursework, but these conversations you have with people in the field, and other maybe external sources of things that you read about, but that importance of knowing the language and the acronyms, and even, what are the big issues in the field, and having command of that equals confidence. And I think that's such a powerful point to be making as we're starting off. So there's a few categories here of upskilling or reskilling, and I'm thinking about the category of just learning like office management productivity tools, and which ones, and that might be for any person who's coming into a new employment in a new company or employer. And then there are those of us who are maybe in a very technical field, and there is a like highly technical information that or knowledge that we need to have. And then I guess the other piece would be when people are career transitioning and they're using coursework to go into a new field. So that's one I want to make sure we touch on too. But can you walk us through these categories, and maybe highlight any specific kind of knowledge or credentials that relaunchers, in particular, people coming off a career break, might need to be aware of in a range of fields? And is there a certain base level of these courses or knowledge bases that are especially valuable to have?
Definitely. Well, thank you so much. I think that's a very valid question about these two kind of different types of learnings. The first, let's get into, would be the productivity tools. So the internet is always your best friend on a job search, because these days, if you're looking at a specific company, you can go to certain websites, you can actually get feedback on what the interview process was like, what tools they used. You can also reach out to recruiters and employees at the company and try to discern what specific sort of productivity tools are they using. But that being said, there's definitely quite a few that are pretty ubiquitous these days in the work environment. Those are tools like Slack, Zoom, Asana, HubSpot, Google Workspace, Salesforce, Hootsuite, HubSpot as well. And so I'm sorry, I said HubSpot twice, but that one is really important because a couple of those tools that I mentioned, including HubSpot, but also Salesforce, also Google Workspace, they will actually allow you to get certified within the tool. So if you go to their websites, you can take courses on how to best use their systems, and it's coming from the tool sort of builders themselves. Outside of that, of course, you can go to various websites. Medium will have top 10 productivity courses. Those might be less focused on how to use the specific tools, but will be more focused on things like time management, communicating with colleagues asynchronously across time zones. And so there's also ample information on how to get more of those softer skills. But regardless of the tools that I just mentioned that have the actual certifications, there's not a one of those where you can't go to their website, view a couple of their videos, get familiar with just what does the interface look like. So I think that's really important before you begin your job search. Another thing is to think about, going back in your career before you might have taken a break. Were you using interchangeable tools? So maybe instead of using like Calendly, you were using You Can Book Me. Instead of using Zoom, you were using Google Hangouts, right? There's a lot of these skills that are super transferable, and it's only like in a name or a brand that it changes. So I also really encourage you to kind of look back in your past and figure out what's the purpose of these productivity tools and what have I done before that'll translate. And it sounds very time consuming and laborious, but like you can literally map it one by one. And again, that's not because the hiring manager or the program manager is going to ask. It's so you go in there equipped with the right information to feel confident and successful.
Mm-hmm. It's so funny that you mentioned that, because so I have a TED talk about relaunching a career after a career break, and I talk in it about that I relaunched so long ago that I was a financial analyst, and we used Lotus 123, which was precursor. That's how long ago it was, to Excel. And so when I went back to work, which was 20 years ago in 2001, I had to relearn spreadsheet analysis on Excel. And it turned out, just as you're saying, it wasn't that hard. Like a lot of the commands were the same and sort of the whole idea of how it worked was the same. Now, PowerPoint was a different story that I had never learned before. And that actually did take me some time. And of course, now it's like second nature to me. But when I was first relaunching, I remember one of my frustrations was that things that took people who were really used to working with it, like 2 minutes would take me an hour. And I had to improve that in order to have my productivity be at a certain level. But that happened to me.
Well, I think there's always a learning curve. And then one more thing that I think you kind of caused me to think about is, let's say you're trying to go into UX or you're trying to go into data science, right? We'll get into this a little bit, but I would just like use the internet to search, like, what are the most common tools that UX engineers use? And I think if we're using that as an example, you might find Photoshop, Behance portfolios, Canva, perhaps even Google PowerPoint, right? Something like that. So you can really familiarize yourself like by industry and then go out and learn a little bit more about those tools in a more specific way.
Yeah, that actually brings me right to the follow-on question, because I am thinking about programming and coding languages for people who are in more technical fields, as you mentioned, on data science or cybersecurity, and UX, by the way, user experience, just so people know that. But are there any particular languages that really jump out at you that feel they're in demand, or if you have them, you're like that much more marketable, or does it matter?
It definitely matters, but I would like to say it shouldn't matter. So when I'm talking to our clients, I'm always like, do you accept interchangeable skills, right? Meaning instead of React, maybe just JavaScript or another JavaScript library. But there are certainly, I would say, languages, specific tools that are in more demand. I know we probably have a varied audience here, so I'll just briefly run through some of the more tech-specific ones, but I'm happy to follow up with information on other industries as well. But for data science, you're always looking for people that want R, Python, Apache Spark, Hadoop, SQL is very in demand, any of the cloud providers. That's actually going to be true of all of these kind of different categories. The cloud providers, meaning Azure, AWS, Google Cloud Provider, all of those offer associate certifications. So that is like a really great place to start if you are trying to think about where to upskill. No matter if you're doing engineering, data science, cyber, the cloud is very key. So those are great things to know. When it comes to cyber, they're oftentimes looking for ability to exercise things like penetration testing, red team, blue team. That's when cyber teams, one of them will be the hacker, one of them is on defense, and you're actually going back and forth with one another to see who can win the game. That's something that cybersecurity companies are oftentimes looking for: identity and access management, risk detection, threat detection. So I think any kind of courses covering those things is going to be really, really powerful. And then when it comes to software engineering, I'm going to touch on a couple of languages from different stacks. But if you're thinking about like more of the front end or full stack, Node.js, React.js, those are really the main things that I'm hearing about when it comes to front end and full stack. On the back end, becoming more and more popular is Scala and Go. When we think about mobile engineering, it's Swift, it's Objective-C. So, at a high level, I think those are the big things you should be looking for. And there's definitely certifications across those realms that will cover those languages and those skill sets.
Okay, so thank you. And that is kind of another language for people who are not in a highly technical field. But for those who are, it's really powerful to know that if you're going to pick, that there are certain languages that you might want to focus on ahead of others. Question around that: when people are getting coding tests or in an interview process, can you give us any, like, how many courses do you need to take in a particular area? I guess it depends on the job you're applying for, but any commentary about what the testing is like once people are in that process?
100%. So first off, I highly, highly recommend, I'm going to repeat this over and over, but utilizing in every way you can the ability to read reviews from previous interviews online. And in that way, you may be able to uncover what specific technical tests the companies are using. So the ones that I hear about the most are Collab Edit, CoderPad, and HackerRank. And I've actually gone in there to sort of like take some of the training or to actually test out the tools. They all give you the ability to practice beforehand. And I think just getting yourself familiar with that is really, really key. Understanding the system before you go in there. Generally, I would say interviews are obviously comprised of maybe 1 or 2 behavioral screens before you get on the technical test. The technical tests that I often hear about are usually anywhere from like 5 to 10 exercises, depending on like the depth. In some cases, they can be take-home exercises, a little less pressure. In some cases, they're actually, they have someone watching you code via video, especially in this more remote realm. And so I think it's actually even a good exercise is if you have someone in the family or in your household that can kind of just like watch you whiteboard essentially online and you can walk them through. They might not be technical, so they're not going to get it exactly, but just say verbally what you're doing while you code, because that is the most common form of a test. And it's also where I kind of hear from candidates, it's where they get the most thrown off because you don't know what kind of interviewer you're going to have. You're not really aware of that. So just any kind of prep you can do beforehand, I think is going to be the most useful to just ensuring that you're ready to go and crush it in front of an interviewer, 100%. And usually you can actually pick the language that you want to use in these tests. In 9 times out of 10, that's the case because most companies, if they know what's up these days, they want to just assess your problem solving skills versus if you know a real language. But that's generally how it goes. You'll be able to pick.
All right, so such great advice there. This whole idea of practicing, it comes into play in every part of the interview, talking about yourself, practicing, especially on video, practice for what might happen if you're in the middle of the interview and like your dog comes in or starts barking or some family member comes in, because employers will say, we're not, what we're really interested in there's a lot of forgiveness around, people are in these home offices and sometimes you're in the middle of a kitchen or something and it's not ideal. People get that. They want to see what you do in terms of how you react when something like this happens. So if you can even practice a scenario where, someone comes in unexpectedly and you just handle it really smoothly because you've anticipated it, then that's helpful there too. But this idea of practicing while someone is watching you, even if you don't, they don't know what you're talking about, it's almost the same as like when I'm giving a talk, I say it out loud. I can't just say it in my head. I have to practice saying it out loud. And so that's the difference. I would say absolutely make yourself do that test with someone else watching you, even if that person doesn't get it. I love that advice. And we have heard about people saying that the question might be posed to them using language X, and then you can say, I can't answer this using language X, but I can answer it using language Y. And so it sounds like this very consistent, Amy, that you're saying there's some interchangeable and it's more the thought process that is important.
Definitely, especially like if a client is about DEI and is about wanting the best candidate, right? It's, for me, so clear. It is not about if you know a specific technical tool, it's about what you're talking about. Can you think on your feet? Can you problem solve? And of course, technical capacity is necessary to do that when it comes to engineering roles. But I truly believe that those soft skills are as important as those more hard technical skills. And again, I think the industry is really changing to realize that in order to get the best candidates, which was not the case even 2 or 3 years ago. So it's really exciting.
And just a couple of comments there. So first of all, we have the Ivory Launch Return to Work Forum. It's a private Facebook group. It has about 8,000 people in our community, very active, very vibrant. You have to answer 3 questions to join it because we want to make sure only relaunchers are in it and not people who want to sell things to relaunchers. But the reason I bring it up is that people talk and change in there about their technical interviews, and they'll say, someone will say, has anyone ever had a technical interview at X company? And someone else will say, yeah, and then they'll say, this is this was a time test, or this is what they asked, or these are the things that you need to make sure that you have available to show. It's super helpful. So I just wanted to put that in the mix in terms of all the other resources out there to check to see, what do these technical interviews consist of.
Mhm.
The other thing is this idea about that you're touching on, Amy, about being a fearless learner. And we've had employers say, it's not so important to us that the person knows everything. What's important to us is how do they approach it when they don't know it? So that is a piece of how you might be evaluated too. Also, another thing that you can practice, like how to respond if you don't know the answer. What language will you use? What expression will you have on your face? And that's important. I did see someone in the questions there pop up, and it says, what if your feed goes down? Like you're in the middle of one of these interviews and your system goes down. Any recommendations there about, like, I don't know, calling also on your phone or something? I don't know.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think this is a little bit inevitable in this fully remote working environment. And I think what's really beautiful about remote work is it's also opened up globally, right? So we don't all have the same internet connection region to region of the world. That's, just a necessity so that we get alternative perspectives. At PowerToFly, we're super global. But I think just begin the conversation if you're having connectivity issues by giving them a disclaimer, right? Like, I'm so sorry, I was experiencing some outages earlier today. It's been fine for the last 30 minutes, but I want to make sure that I value your time. I truly apologize in advance should that happen. And if it does, I have email on my phone and I will send you a message right away. But I'm hoping it doesn't happen in this case. But I think the most important thing is to just give them a disclaimer, be honest about your situation, and then to have a backup plan, right? Whether that is calling them on the phone, shooting them an email, just being clear, transparent with them. I have made every effort that I possibly can to have good internet right now, or to be in the right working environment. There may be something out of my control, but I have a solution for should that happen, going back to our problem solving. So I would kind of approach it that way.
Great example. And actually, I have so many more questions for you, but I'm just going to intersperse it with some questions I see in the chat. Someone's saying, can you give us a few free online classes or courses about project management and HR areas of expertise? Because it says the gold standards such as PMP or SHRM are so expensive. So maybe also comment on when is it worth it to just make that investment, as opposed to, are there free online substitutions that would be viewed as a valid and credential for that field?
Sure. So I do think, you have a couple of certifications when it comes to, I guess, like the actual project management sort of forum in the United States. But there are other kind of project management courses and certifications that you can get on Udemy, or you could get on edX, right? And those might not be free, but they will be closer to a $20 price point versus some of the ones like the nano degrees on Udacity, that are going to be closer to $299. So I think you definitely, you can look at this landscape and I think find certifications really for any sort of sector at any price point. But I think the most important thing is not always the certifications that you have if you're looking to return to the work program. I think it would be researching the companies, right? And looking for the ones that have return to work programs specifically in project management, because that way you'll get on the job training. And oftentimes the companies will also subsidize your certification if you're there long enough. So I think you can kind of go to one of these lower cost forums first, get some sort of certification that isn't the accredited one in the United States that might cost quite as much. Or alternatively, you can find the companies with project management returnship programs, and then of course get the training on the job. And like I said, hopefully get that larger certification that costs more through them later.
And there are some times where you actually have to get a certain kind of certification. Like we had an engineer who was looking at quality roles, and everyone required Lean or Six Sigma certification to even apply. And she had to decide she was going to invest in it. And you can think this is an investment in my future, and approach it that way. But I love this sort of gradual approach that you're suggesting, Amy, for people that it's really not an option to invest that kind of money up front. And we know that employers who run return to work programs, that MIT edX course in Python is considered a valid credential. The important thing is, and that's a free course, you don't have to take the paid version and even get the certificate, but the important thing is that you finish it, because I think a lot of these courses you don't finish. But you've mentioned a few different sources of courses, and I want to know if you can just talk about it. I hear edX and Coursera and Udemy and Udacity and LinkedIn Learning and Khan Academy. Any sort of classification or ranking of these that you can give us some commentary on?
Sure. So it's very subjective, right? As I was sort of prepping for this, I was thinking about, it all kind of depends on what you're looking for. Udacity, for instance, you can get those nano degrees. You have really expert people teaching them, but it's at a higher price point, right? I think it's about like $400 monthly. LinkedIn Learning is also subscription, but at a much lower cost. And I think LinkedIn Learning actually acquired Lynda. I see someone talking about Lynda, so they're very similar, or even the same in this case. So that's at a lower price point for a yearly subscription. When it comes to Khan Academy, for instance, I hear that's a very common one. That's really great for people that are students, for maybe entry-level people as well. And then edX and Coursera are essentially pretty similar. Both of them require payment for certifications, but will give you free courses otherwise. And so, you can go to all of these websites and you will find certifications in data science, in AWS, for instance. But it really is a matter of doing the research about how much you want to spend. And I think if you're someone who's not really sure what they want to do, then maybe you would go with a lower price point, right? Maybe you would do the Udemy courses for $19.99 a pop instead of investing, $499 a month in one of the higher paying subscription, because you're still trying to figure out that next step for you. But I myself use Coursera quite a lot when it comes to sort of honing my skills at work. But I definitely think all of them are going to give you great tips, are going to have great teachers. And it's more so about kind of what works for what you need now.
Okay, very helpful. And can you talk about something called a GitHub portfolio for technical relaunchers, and what it is, how it's used, and how it relates to coursework?
Definitely. So GitHub is actually, a very respected developer tool, and it has different tiers. I think for this purpose, for our relaunchers, you would just use the sort of individual free level account. And basically what it does is give you the ability to post your projects, to share some of your code. It can be obviously linked to on your LinkedIn page or LinkedIn to your resume. And so it gives, especially for entry level people, right? If you're super talented, but you don't have any work experience, it does allow a very technical recruiter to still go in and check out the code that you've been doing. I think there's also an area for peer review. So you can find connections, find mentors, get really great advice from just like the GitHub community, because it is so respected. But I highly, highly suggest, to your point, that if you are someone who's returning to work or you're entry level and you're trying to get back into engineering, that you make a GitHub and that you attach it to the portfolio. And I've seen any number of things in there, right? Some people do volunteer work, even though it's like a live app, you could put that in there. You could just put personal projects, experiments, whatever it may be, but just make sure that it's built out. Because again, like I said, it's one way to prove your technical prowess without having any of the work experience or having that big gap in between on a resume.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very helpful. Now there's this whole category. Someone's asking a question about it. The Amazon, there's the AWS certified data analytics. There's Salesforce, and we have had relaunchers swear by like learning Salesforce in a way that you could then implement it or teach it and actually be hired to do that, not just for your own personal use. And someone's asking, I am transitioning into the excuse me, sorry, data science field, and I don't have the 5 years of data analytics experience. So do you have any thoughts on this? And can you talk about getting AWS certified or Salesforce certified?
Sure. So for AWS, they'll have different levels of seniority, right? So there is, I believe, an AWS certified course. It's Cloud Solutions Architect Associate. So it's made for entry-level people. That's the same for the Certified Information System Security Professional, right? You can get an associate in that degree instead of like the advanced degree, which would require you to have 5 years of experience, 2 years of experience. So it's very much just making sure that you're looking at the right certification program, because no matter the skill set, they'll have some ability for entry-level people to get certified in some way. But of course, it's not going to be at the highest level. I will say, for whoever is asking the questions about Salesforce certification, that is a very in-demand skill set. I feel like companies cannot hire for Salesforce consultants, Salesforce developers quickly enough. And so I just recommend making sure that you find a program that is going to take away that work requirement. I have seen some say, a CS degree is comparable, but I think really just look for the ones that require no sort of experience, and there should be ample, regardless of what area you're looking to get certified in.
Let's jump to boot camps. Any comments on are they realistic for relaunchers to take? Sometimes there's some sort of pre-course that you take before you get into it. And do you think people don't talk about how hard they really are? Or I've heard a lot of different responses to them. So really interested in your thoughts on boot camps.
Well, I mean, for me, honestly, I feel like one of my biggest jobs at PowerToFly is really telling employers why bootcamp candidates are just as good as those people who might have gone to Ivy League or, really well-known and respected computer science institutions. Boot camps are a great way for people who perhaps didn't opt to study that in school, or perhaps didn't have the opportunity to still get in there and learn just about engineering, data science, how to do it. And so I do think there was a level of skepticism in sort of the corporate environment to accept boot camp candidates that has changed over time, right? And I think if you have a boot camp under your belt, and then you also have a strong GitHub, you should be able to get at least a fellowship, right? And that's where I think, I really want people to understand that you sort of dating the client is just as important. If you're entry level and you went to a boot camp, you can definitely still find companies that have fellowship programs that are literally made for people that have never been in engineering. The same can be said for if you're a mother or you took a break to care for someone. There's companies that understand that the skills you gained during that break or you skills you had in your previous career are just as important. And so I really encourage you to go and seek out those companies who already are opening the door for people that don't have the traditional background, but who are going out of their way to invest their time and their money into learning. And so I would ask you to really do that research before you apply to any jobs as well.
Mm-hmm. And then one more follow-up on boot camps. I noticed that there are different types of boot camps and they're structured different ways. And some of them you have to pay a pretty hefty, maybe $12,000 or something up front. And there are others that seem to have some kind of arrangement that when you get hired, a percentage of your salary or something goes to pay for it. Any details about how that all works?
Yeah, so there are a couple of them, and I think most of the higher price points will guarantee at least interviews afterwards. I think some of them at the highest price point might have arrangements where they can actually guarantee a job. More of the economical ones will not require that piece, but I do think that they're just as valuable, right? I think the key piece, if I could say this again, is that after you finish boot camp, going to a company that will value that versus just applying to the candidate ATS like black hole, right? Because if those companies don't have those programs, it means they're not really investing in them, right? And so instead of looking at a resume and saying, oh, well, I don't see this, but I believe there's opportunity based on what I see, those companies are still kind of taking that old mindset of, okay, I don't see these keywords, I'm not even going to consider them. And so I think like that's really what I would say. It shouldn't be necessarily the cost of the boot camp that is the reason you do or don't get a job. I think a lot of the ones that are free or lower priced are really valuable too. I just think it's not stopping your journey there of, oh, I completed a boot camp, now I'm going to get a job. It's continuing to fine tune where you're applying to, how you're applying, the story that you're telling about yourself as you continue with your job search, if that makes sense.
All right, we have a follow-on question here about Salesforce, and it says this person used Salesforce on a daily basis when she was working or he was working before the career break. Is it necessary to get certified in Salesforce CRM?
So I wouldn't say it's necessary if you have like a lot of in-depth experience that you can speak to in your background, right? If you can really elaborate on not just that you worked on Salesforce, but in what ways, what projects, whatever it may be, then I think a certification shouldn't be necessary. But I would be remiss if I didn't say that, tools are changing so constantly that if you've been out of there 1-2 years, I would perhaps look into maybe modernizing your expertise just to make sure you have like a stronger foundation when you go into the interview process. Because that's like a really major thing in tech is, if you do leave the workforce, as you should if it works for your life, things don't stop when it comes to the evolution of the technology or the languages that people are using. So I think it's always useful to re-up if you can, whether that's certification or just personal projects.
This is such an important point. We say technological obsolescence is a temporary condition because you can upskill. But for companies that have return to work programs, they're competitive. And the people who have already started to do this coursework in advance of applying will sometimes have an advantage. And that's a question that we actually got. We had a few questions submitted before the event today. And one of them was, how long prior to your anticipated relaunch should you start the reskilling process?
Yeah, so I might give an annoying answer. I'm going to say never is too early to start, right? But I think that, if you're not going to be looking for a job until next year, maybe you don't want to take a 1-month-long certification right now. You might want to start that closer to 6 months out, right? At that point, you could take the certification. If you're in tech or engineering, you can start building out your GitHub. You can volunteer a little bit. You can get some feedback from code reviews. So I think like about 6 months, anything before that might be a little preemptive because of the change in technology. But I think about 6 months is a really good starting point. Of course, depending on the program, the cadence of whatever program you might choose.
So very good advice. And, the idea that when you're on career break, you're on career break for a reason and not so you can then be immediately figuring out how you can get back into the workforce. But also this idea of these courses some of them are online. They're self-paced. You can maybe kind of always, it's like kind of you always have a book you're reading. You could always have a course you're taking, but also keep in mind that there's a momentum piece and you want to keep going in order to finish it in a timely way. But again, that signaling is really important. And sometimes you take a course and then you get interested in it, and then there's a subsequent course that you can take. So there's a prerequisite almost, and then you take the next one. And if you start earlier, then you have more time to sort of take a few in a sequence.
Definitely a very good point.
Now, someone said, where do you put these certifications or credentials or coursework on your resume? Do you think there's a benefit to putting them up front? Do you put them at the end? Any comments on that?
I mean, this is totally just personal preference from my time in recruiting, but I always really like when you sort of have the work experience on one side and then just to the left or just to the right, you've left enough margin to say tools and to say certifications, vice versa, right? You want to keep it at like a level eye line because it is just as important. But you don't want to put it at the very top, because the very top should just sort of be like introducing yourself generally. And I think that's very important if you're trying to pivot to a new job or something unrelated to what you were doing, is that sort of personal summary, as some people call it, 1 to 2 sentences of why you're moving, how your skills are transferable, the work experience, the certifications that you took to get closer to that skill you want to focus on in the future. So I think that's a pretty good setup. And I'm always happy, just as an aside, to meet with anyone, to have someone from our team go over resumes as well, if that's pertinent to anyone.
That's great. Yeah, and maybe a little further down, you have a section called recent and relevant coursework. So it's as distinct from that education you had like 25 years ago. That's going to be at the very bottom. So that could be something that you fit into your resume. You know, someone just commented that my issue is I'm all over the place reskilling. It's an interesting point, because you can actually use reskilling as a way to test out your interest in certain areas. And, maybe you take some course and you're super into it, and that signals to you that that's a good area for you. And then another one, you didn't even really finish it. So how do you look, Amy, at using coursework or credentialing to maybe eliminate or identify what you should really be going into if you have more than one option?
Definitely. I think it's all about sort of like the time you have to dedicate towards that. Of course, I think it's a really great way to sort of disqualify certain realms. But I also think, if you're looking to upskill or reskill, if you're looking to start a new career, like really kind of going back to what you love to do when you were younger. Like, I know that sounds like very basic, but I think it's like exploring those past interests. And in that way, you might have just a little bit more of a direction in where you want to go in your career. I will never say that taking too many courses is a bad thing, but I will say that when you're applying to companies, if you start applying to like 9 different roles on 9 teams, I have heard, and this is just transparent feedback, that it sort of indicates like a lack of focus in a career. And so I think it's really good to take courses to learn about various things. But when it comes to actually applying, you really do need to have sort of decided, okay, I'm going to apply to maybe these three roles in this one department that are very similar, but on different teams, versus, okay, I took all these classes, I'm still not sure, so I'm just going to go apply to every department. Because I just want to share that I do hear transparently that that's not really the best look if you're trying to get into a company, having taken a break or come from a different role.
Yep, totally agree with you there. Something else that's occurring to me that's relevant here is, so recently on LinkedIn, there's this guy named Brendan Bastide, who's a very senior guy at Kaplan. Kaplan company is very big in ed tech. And he had posted something that said, the reason there's a mismatch between, there's 10 million jobs and 8 million unemployed, and why isn't that matching up better, is something called the interest gap, because sometimes people are just not interested in the same jobs where there's a lot of availability. And I commented on it, I said, yeah, and there's also the intimidation gap. Because I think some people, and myself included, I have to force myself to really dive into certain, especially more highly technical courses, because I get kind of nervous, like, can I actually do it? Am I even going to understand, or is it just going to be so confusing I don't even want to get into it? So any advice on how to overcome like an intimidation gap and try something, because maybe once you get into it, it makes more sense than you might have thought.
I love this idea of like an intimidation gap. I think that's so real. It all goes back to like your confidence and why some people feel like they can command a room for no reason, and others have every reason to command a room and yet don't have the confidence to do it. So at a very basic level, it is literally like, someone told me this years ago. I thought it was like a bit cheesy, but it is just superwoman posing. Like, it is making yourself like feel like a boss and be ready to take that interview. And a lot of it all starts here. I think the other thing is, if a company is really still clinging to these ideas that you need this specific background, you need this specific degree, like, we're living in an age where they're going to be the ones losing, because enough companies have caught on to the fact that, you know, just saying you want to be about diversity is not enough to actually enact a diverse team. What it takes is return to work programs. What it takes is fellowship programs. What it takes is allowing entry-level people to start and upskill on the job. Otherwise, it's not going to happen fast enough. And so many companies understand that now, that the ones who aren't sort of modernizing and getting behind it, you don't really want to work there anyway. And that is why I think, like, surround yourself with employees and a company that understands already that you have so much to offer, even if you might not be a technical expert in every realm of the role. And the only way you can really do that is looking at where they invest their money into programs like ERGs, into the ones we've been discussing, and actually, like, being very thoughtful and intentional about where you apply. Because the intimidation gap goes away if you have employees and leaders lifting you up. Instead of making you feel less than, they'll be like, I don't care if you're scared, get in a meeting. That's what everyone at my company did for me, right? I used to be so mortified to be on public speaking events like this. And so I think it's really like doing the research that it's a team you want to be a part of, and it's a team that's going to pick you up instead of pushing you down. And you can kind of discern that before you ever start working somewhere, through those online reviews and through the initiatives that they already have in place.
Thank you. That's a great answer. Couple more questions and then we'll probably wrap it up. This has been such an informative conversation, Amy. I'm just loving all the interaction and all the advice that you have. So one of them says, can you address how to deal with an AI virtual interview? The interviewer is not live, but taped. And I suspect it's all about biometrics, since you're told not to wear glasses or readers. Do you know anything about this? I don't know anything about this.
So I'm going to be honest, I've never really gotten that specific into an AI testing sort of technical test. I'm happy to do some research though and look into that a little bit deeper. I think sort of that general idea applies of what sort of stalking can you do online and figure out about the technical test beforehand. You know, why can't you wear these glasses? Like, what exactly is it testing? A lot of times, like recruiting teams, they will prep you with a nice packet, but sometimes, oh, it was an interview, not a test. Interesting.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, well, we'll have to research that. That's Definitely something new to me too. The idea, like, if I couldn't wear my glasses, that would be a problem. Anyway, thank you for the question. We can take a look at that and see, maybe there's a place we can post it so people can see. And then someone asked, do you have any idea about RPA? What is the future of RPA? I don't know what RPA is.
So RPA is, I believe, robotic process automation. It is a buzzword that I often hear about, but it's also one that is extremely hard to find in a recruiting sense. So I think if you're like considering getting that sort of expertise or growing in that field, that is a very, very good idea. And I can see they have specific academies about RPAs. But it's certainly something that I hear about more and more these days. And again, that I don't see a huge market for.
Interesting. All right. And I think there's a comment here. RPA is used in accounting and finance to automate processes. Okay. I'll have to do some research myself on RPA. But I don't know. Is that a different kind of RPA? I don't know.
No, I think it's all the same, right? It's oftentimes like used in financial services, but it's sort of a technology.
Okay. Well, Amy, as we're wrapping up, anything that you want to highlight about what's going on at PowerToFly, or any events that you're having, or any closing advice to leave with our audience?
Definitely. Well, of course, I know you have really great resources through Ivory Launch, but we also have Chat and Learns, community learning at PowerToFly that you can find on the website. In addition to that, if you go to PowerToFly jobs and you search return to work, returnship programs, I know a lot of our clients do them. Deloitte, Morgan Stanley, I think American Express, Raytheon, there's a ton of them. So there'll be a lot on our website if you want to look into programs there. And in addition to that, if you're just trying to wet your feet, if you will, into the job search, our virtual career fairs are less kind of targeted, but they are a chance for you to come and meet up to 10 companies at a time. You can move around in the rooms. You can kind of do what I said, like date the company and figure out where they're investing their time and resources when it comes to DEI and if you want to be there. So I think any of those sort of methods or forums could be really helpful in your job search. And of course, I am always here. You can connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to be a part of the Power to Fly community or have further questions.
That's great. That's very generous of you, and thank you. I'll just make a quick announcement about Ivory Launch, and then we can wrap up. So ivorylaunch.com. If you want to come onto our website, get on our mailing list, you'll get a return to work report every week. We release a podcast every week. And you can also find out about programs and jobs specifically targeting people who are returning after a career break. So just wanted to highlight that for our audience. And also we maintain a list of the active return to work programs that are maybe some of them are running all the time and some of them will run only certain times of the year, but that's another resource for you. All right. Amy, thank you again. This was a great discussion, and we really appreciate you spending the time and generously sharing your advice. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Carol, and to the audience for great questions, and good luck as you are returning to work. I am so thankful to be here, and I hope you all have a great weekend.
Thank you so much. And I just saw something I forgot to mention, the Ivory Launch Return to Work Conference, October 5th through 7th. Sign up now. Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you.